Emmeline, you will listen.
I will not, your grace.
This is most unwise.
Unhand me, sir.
She slapped his hand away. Right there, in front of every lord, every lady, and every flickering candle in Thornfield Hall, Lady Emmeline Carew did what no woman had ever dared to do. She looked the Duke of Ashburn dead in the eyes and pulled her arm from his grip like he was nothing. The ballroom went silent. 10 years. 10 long, humiliating years of being the woman everyone whispered about. The ward he never acknowledged. The girl he kept in his estate but refused to introduce. The one who sat at the far end of every dinner table while he laughed with other women, signed her name on documents without ever looking at her, and walked past her in hallways like she was part of the wallpaper. 10 years of swallowing her pride. 10 years of pretending it did not hurt. But tonight was different. Tonight, and another man had offered her his hand in marriage, and the Duke of Ashburn, Lord Caspian Greaves, the man who had never once claimed her, had suddenly appeared at her side with fire in his jaw and something dangerous in his eyes. And she had slapped his hand away. The candles flickered. Someone gasped. Lord Caspian's jaw tightened in a way that made half the room step back. But Emmeline did not step back. She lifted her chin, smoothed her gloves, and turned away from him like he had done to her 1,000 times before. She did not know that he would follow her out into the cold garden that night. She did not know what he would say. She did not know that everything, absolutely everything, was about to break open. But you do know one thing already, don't you? 10 years is a very long time to keep a secret. So tell me, whose side are you on tonight? Drop your comment and tell us where you are watching from. And if this story already has your heart, please hit that subscribe button right now. You do not want to miss what happens next. Emmeline Carew had exactly 4 minutes before the Duke of Ashburn walked through those doors, and she used every second of them to rehearse the one thing she had promised herself she would do tonight. Leave. Not quietly. Not with her head down and her hands folded, the way she had been trained to carry herself in his presence. Not with the usual polite smile she wore like armor whenever Lord Caspian Greaves entered a room and looked through her, the way sunlight passes through glass, touching nothing, leaving nothing warm behind. Tonight, she was going to walk out of Thornfield Hall on the arm of Lord Phineas Darrow, accept his offer, and never look back. She had made her decision 3 weeks ago, the morning after Caspian's annual winter dinner, when she had sat across from him at a table of 30 guests, and he had introduced every single person by name except her. A woman leaned over and whispered, "And who are you, dear?" And Emmeline had smiled and said, "No one important," because that was what 10 years had taught her to believe. She was done believing it. Lord Phineas was already waiting near the far arch of the ballroom, tall and warm-eyed, a man who had spent the last 4 months treating her like she mattered. He was not a duke. He did not have Caspian's sharp jaw or that particular way of filling a doorway that made every woman in the room forget her own name. But Phineas looked at her. Actually looked at her. And that was more than Caspian had done in a decade. She crossed the ballroom floor with purpose, weaving through clusters of silk and laughter, or nodding at faces she recognized but did not stop for. Lady Orinthal Bassett caught her eye and raised a brow. Emmeline kept moving. Old Lord Rufus Gale tried to stop her with a comment about the weather, and she gave him 3 words and a smile, and did not slowed down. She was almost at the arch when the doors at the far end of the hall opened and the room shifted. It always shifted when Caspian arrived. It was something Emmeline had noticed years ago and hated noticing. The way energy moved toward him like water finding a slope. Women straightened, men cleared their throats. Conversations rearranged themselves. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on Phineas. He saw her coming and smiled, and it was a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes and stayed there. He stepped forward, extended his hand, and said her name, like it was something worth saying. That was the moment Caspian appeared at her elbow. She did not know how he crossed the room so fast. She did not know why he was even beside her, but his hand closed around her arm just above the wrist. Not rough, but firm, and the familiar scent of cedar and cold air came with him, and her entire body betrayed her by recognizing it. "Emmeline," he said. Just her name, nothing else. She looked at his hand on her arm. She looked at Phineas, who had gone very still. She looked back at Caspian's hand, and then she did something she had dreamed of doing for 4 years, and never believed she actually would. She pulled her arm free and stepped away from him. The nearest cluster of guests went quiet. Lady Orenthal's fan stopped moving. Lord Rufus Gale's glass paused halfway to his mouth. But Caspian's expression did not crack. That was the thing about him. He had been born with the kind of face that revealed nothing unless he chose to let it. But something moved behind his eyes. Something quick and unreadable that she had never seen there before. "Forgive me," she said, and her voice was steady, which surprised even her. "But I believe you are heading elsewhere." Phineas stepped beside her and placed her hand gently on his arm. It was a quiet thing, not a declaration, but the room read it exactly as it was. Every person watching understood what had just happened. The ward of the Duke of Ashburn had chosen another man in full view of society. Caspian said nothing. He stood exactly where he was and watched her walk away with Phineas, and she felt his gaze on her back like a hand pressed flat between her shoulder blades. Warm and heavy, and 10 years too late. She did not look back, but her heart was not as obedient as her feet. It hammered against her ribs the entire length of the room, loud and confused and furious at itself, because even now, even after everything, some stubborn piece of her had wanted him to say more than just her name. She hated that piece of herself completely. Phineas guided her gently through the far arch and out into the corridor that led to the east sitting room, which was quieter and lit with softer light. She breathed for the first time since the doors had opened. "Are you all right?" Phineas asked. He was watching her with that careful attention he always gave her, never pressing, never demanding, just present. "I am perfectly well," she said, and smiled at him, and meant it as much as she could. He studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "I have spoken with my solicitor," he said. "Everything is in order, whenever you are ready. There is no pressure, Emmeline. I want you to be certain." She looked at him. Kind eyes, steady hands. A man who had said her name correctly the first time they met, and remembered it at every meeting after. A man who had asked her opinion on things, and then actually listened to the answer. A man who had never once made her feel like a problem to be managed, or a guest who had overstayed. "I am certain," she said. He exhaled slowly, and the relief in his face was so genuine that something in her chest softened. He reached into his coat and produced a small ring, plain and elegant, and held it out to her the way one offers something precious. Carefully, with both hands, she reached for it. The door opened. Caspian walked in like he owned the room, which technically, as owner of Thornfield Hall, he did. Phineas straightened. Emmeline closed her fingers around the ring. The air in the sitting room changed. "Lord Darrow," Caspian said, his voice carrying that particular tone she knew too well, polite and lethal at once. "I believe the evening's card game is assembling in the West Room. They are short players." Phineas looked at Emmeline. She gave him a small, reassuring nod. He held Caspian's gaze for a measured beat, long enough to make it clear he was leaving by choice and not by command. And then he bowed to Emmeline, murmured that he would find her before the evening ended, and left. The door closed. Emmeline turned to face Caspian fully. She had the ring in her hand. She made no move to hide it. He looked at it. His jaw shifted once. Then he lifted his eyes to hers. "You were going to accept him," he said. "I did accept him," she replied. Something crossed his face. She could not name it. In 10 years she had catalogued every one of his expressions, the cold ones, the polished ones, the ones he wore at funerals, and the ones he wore at state dinners. But this one was new. This one looked almost like pain, and she refused to let herself believe that. "Emmeline." He said her name again, and this time it sounded different. Rougher. Like something he had been holding behind his teeth for a long time. "Do not," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it had an edge. "Do not say my name like that now. Not tonight. Not after 10 years of treating me like a ghost in your own house." He did not look away. "No, I need to explain something to you." "You have had 4,000 days to explain things to me," she said. "You chose silence, every single one of them." He took one step toward her, and she took one step back, and that small exchange said more than either of them had said aloud in years. He stopped. He looked at the space between them like it was a wound. "There are things you do not know," he said, "things I could not tell you." "Then you should have tried harder," she said. She walked past him, close enough that the skirt of her gown brushed against his coat, and she felt him go very still as she passed. She opened the door herself, stepped into the corridor, and did not give him the satisfaction of a single glance back, but in her closed fist she was still holding Phineas Darrow's ring, and her hand was trembling. She did not know, as she walked back toward the light and noise of the ballroom, that behind her, Caspian Greaves stood in that sitting room for a very long time without moving. She did not know that he pressed one hand flat against the door after it closed, and that his face, when there was no one left to guard it from, looked like a man who had just watched something irreplaceable walk out of his hands. She did not know any of that. She only knew that the night was not over yet, and something in the air of Thornfield Hall felt like a storm that had been building for a decade and was finally ready to break. The ballroom was louder when Emmeline returned to it, or perhaps it only felt that way, because her ears were ringing and her chest was tight, and she was working very hard to look like a woman who had just experienced a perfectly ordinary evening. She found a seat near the tall windows that overlooked the frozen garden, and accepted a glass of warm punch from a passing servant, and sat with her back straight and her expression arranged into something peaceful, which was a complete lie but a convincing one. Lady Orinthal Bassett appeared within minutes. She always appeared within minutes when something interesting had happened, moving through a room the way water moves through cracks, finding every gap and settling into it with perfect ease. No, she was a woman of 53, with silver-streaked hair and sharp grey eyes that missed absolutely nothing, and she had been watching Emmeline navigate Thornfield Hall for the better part of 7 years. She sat beside her without asking, and said nothing for a moment, which was more alarming than if she had spoken. "You held up remarkably well," she finally said. "I always do," Emmeline replied. "Yes," Orinthal agreed, "but tonight was different." She tilted her head slightly. "He followed you." "He followed me to assert control over a social situation that inconvenienced him," Emmeline said. "It meant nothing." Orinthal looked at her with the patient expression of a woman who had been married twice, widowed twice, and had therefore developed a very accurate understanding of what men did and did not mean. "My dear," she said gently, "that I have watched that man manage inconvenient social situations for 15 years, and I have never once seen him move that fast for anything that meant nothing." Emmeline said nothing. Across the room, she could see Lord Phineas returning from the corridor that led toward the west wing. He caught her eye and smiled, and she returned it. He was making his way toward her, pausing to exchange brief words with Lord Rufus Gale and young Sir Alderton Finch, who was barely 22, and always looked slightly startled by the existence of large gatherings. Beside Phineas walked his sister, Miss Corabel Darrow, a brisk and opinionated woman of 30, who wore her opinions the same way she wore her jewellery, loudly and without apology. Corabel had made her feelings about Emmeline very clear over the past 4 months, which was to say she approved, firmly and vocally, and had told Phineas on at least 3 occasions that if he didn't act quickly, someone more perceptive would. She reached Emmeline first. "I heard there was a scene," Corabel said, sitting down on Emmeline's other side and fanning herself with quick, efficient strokes. Lord Finch was describing it in the corridor with tremendous enthusiasm. "There was no scene," Emmeline said. "There was absolutely a scene," Orinthal said pleasantly, at exactly the same moment. Corabel looked delighted. "Good. It was time." Phineas arrived and sat across from them and gave his sister a look that clearly communicated a request for restraint. Corabel ignored it with great expertise. "The Duke looked," Corabel said carefully, choosing her words with unusual precision for once, "unsettled." Emmeline turned her glass in her hands. "The Lord Greaves does not get unsettled." "He does," Orinthal said quietly, "when something he has taken for granted shows signs of leaving." The music shifted in the ballroom. A slower melody moved through the air, something with longing built into its rhythm, the kind of song that made people look at each other differently. Several couples drifted toward the center of the floor. Emmeline watched them and thought about the ring still sitting in the small interior pocket of her gown, where she had placed it when she returned to the ballroom. It was warm against her side. Real. Solid. She thought about Phineas's face when he had held it out to her. And then she thought, against her will, about Caspian's face in the sitting room. That new expression, the one she could not name. She pushed the thought away. Across the ballroom, the Caspian emerged from the far corridor. He had composed himself completely. He stood at the edge of the room with that familiar, controlled stillness, speaking with Lord Harcastle and his wife, nodding at something being said to him, the picture of ease. But his eyes found her immediately. She looked away first, which she hated, but the alternative was holding his gaze across a crowded ballroom while sitting next to the man she had just agreed to marry, and she was not prepared for whatever that would feel like. "Emmeline," Phineas said. His voice was low and private, meant only for her. "If tonight has been too much, I can have the carriage brought around." She looked at him. He was always offering her exits, always making sure she had a way out of any situation she did not want to be in. It was one of the things she valued most about him, and one of the things that made her feel, with a complicated and guilty clarity, that she didn't deserve him quite as much as he deserved her. "Not yet," she said. "I would like to stay a little longer." He nodded and did not ask why, which was another thing she valued about him. The evening moved forward. More guests arrived. The card rooms grew loud. A minor argument broke out between two young lords near the fireplace over something to do with horses, and Sir Alderton Finch involved himself in it with the enthusiasm of someone who had not yet learned that enthusiasm in arguments rarely helps. Lady Harkastle played 3 pieces on the piano with great confidence and middling accuracy. Lord Rufus Gale fell asleep in an armchair, and no one disturbed him, because everyone agreed he looked peaceful. Through all of it, Emmeline was aware of exactly where Caspian was in the room. She could not stop herself. 10 years had trained her body to track him the way a compass tracks north, uselessly and automatically, and without her permission. He did not approach her again. He spoke with his guests. He moved through the room with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times. He laughed at something Lord Harkastle said. He was, to all appearances, having a perfectly normal evening, except that every time she turned away from him, she had the absolute certainty that he had just been looking at her. It was nearly 11 when Corabelle announced that she was going to inspect the dessert table and potentially engage Lord Finch in a debate about something improving. Orinthal drifted away to speak with an old friend. Phineas was pulled into a conversation with a business associate near the far wall, and Emmeline was briefly alone. She stood and walked to the tall windows, looking out at the garden below. It was cold out there, the paths edged with frost, and the hedges standing dark against a pale sky. The garden at Thornfield had always been the one place she had ever felt entirely herself. She had walked those paths for 10 years, in every season, at every hour, usually alone. She pressed her fingers lightly to the glass. She heard him before she saw his reflection. She had always been able to hear him in a room, and even when she was trying not to, he came to stand beside her, not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could feel the warmth he carried, that particular warmth that had always felt unfair coming from a man who had been so cold to her, in every way that counted. "I owe you an explanation," he said, his voice low enough that no one nearby could catch it. "I know you do not want to hear it tonight. I am asking for 10 minutes. Somewhere private." She kept her eyes on the garden. "You are asking—" "Yes. You did not ask 10 years ago when you brought me to this house," she said. "You did not ask 6 years ago when you turned down 3 perfectly reasonable offers on my behalf without telling me. You didn't ask last year when you dismissed my companion without notice and replaced her with your own choice." She heard him exhale. "You simply did things," she continued, "and expected me to arrange myself around them." She turned and looked at him. He was watching her with that new expression again, the one that looked like pain, and she held herself very still against it. "Why should tonight be different?" "Because tonight you are about to make a permanent decision," he said, and there are things you deserve to know before you do. The decision is made, she said. Emmeline. Stop saying my name, she said, and her voice cracked just slightly at the end, just enough for him to hear it, and she saw it land on him, like something physical. She turned back to the window. In the glass, she could see both their reflections, standing side by side like a portrait of something that had never quite happened. 10 minutes, he said again. That is all I am asking. She should have said no. She had every reason to say no. She had 10 years of reasons. But something in his voice was different tonight. Something stripped of the usual armor. Something she had spent years searching for evidence of and never finding, and now that it was finally there, she didn't know what to do with it. The garden, she said, quietly, still looking at the window. I am going for some air. If you have something to say, you may say it there. She left the window without looking at him, collected her shawl from the back of her chair, nodded to Phineas across the room with a small gesture that told him she was stepping out, and walked toward the garden doors. The cold hit her the moment she stepped outside, or the frost on the path crunched faintly beneath her shoes, and her breath came out in small clouds of white, and the noise of the party faded behind the thick doors until it was just a murmur. She walked to the stone bench at the center of the garden and stood beside it, facing the dark hedges, her hands wrapped in her shawl. She heard the door open and close behind her. He was coming, and for the first time in 10 years, she did not know what happened next. The garden was silent, except for the wind moving through the frozen hedges and the distant sound of music bleeding through the walls of Thornfield Hall. Emmeline stood at the stone bench and did not sit. Sitting felt too much like settling, and she was done settling. Caspian came to stand a few feet away from her. Not beside her. Not across from her. Just near enough that the space between them felt deliberate, like something he was being careful about. She waited. He looked at the sky for a moment, which was something she had never seen him do before. Caspian Greaves always looked at the thing directly in front of him, always faced whatever room he was in with that controlled, forward attention. Looking at the sky was something people did when they were searching for words, and Caspian never searched for words. Tonight, apparently, not he was searching. When my father died, he began, and she almost turned to look at him but stopped herself. He left behind something that was not in the official papers, a private instruction, a condition attached to the estate that only my solicitor and I knew about. She said nothing. The cold moved through her shawl. He had made a promise to your father, Caspian said, before your father died. A promise about you. Now she turned. He was looking at her directly, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. He looked tired in a way that went deeper than one evening. He looked like a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and had finally decided he could not carry it any further without setting it down, even if setting it down broke something. My father and yours were close, long before either of us was born, he said. Your father trusted mine completely. And when your father became ill, when he understood that he was not going to recover, he asked one thing. He asked that you be brought into the Greaves household and protected, not placed with distant relatives who did not know you, not sent to a school on the other side of the country. Protected. Here. Emmeline's throat tightened. I knew that much, she said carefully. I was told I was brought here as a ward. You were, Caspian said. But there was a second part of the promise, one my father made without fully understanding the consequences of it. He promised your father that you would not be pressured, influenced, or directed toward any attachment that had not grown freely and honestly on your own terms. He paused, including an attachment to me. The cold in the garden felt different now, sharper. My father believed he was protecting you, Caspian said. He put it in writing, a private legal document. If I were to show any partiality toward you, any open preference, any behavior that could be interpreted as steering you toward me by the weight of obligation or proximity, your inheritance would be removed entirely. Everything your father left for you would be forfeit, and it would not come to you. It would go to the distant cousin you have never met, who has been waiting 17 years to claim it. Emmeline stared at him. You were 19 when you came here, he said. I was 26. I had just inherited a dukedom I was not ready for, and a legal document that told me the one thing I was absolutely forbidden to do was let you know that I noticed you. He looked at her steadily. So I did not let you know. She opened her mouth, closed it. Every dinner, he said, every introduction I didn't make, every time I walked past you in the corridor, every woman I was seen speaking with at every event we both attended, all of it was deliberate. All of it was me following the terms of a document I despised every single day since I read it. The music from inside the hall swelled faintly, and then softened again. Somewhere in the garden, a branch cracked under the weight of frost. You turned down offers on my behalf, she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. 6 years ago, 3 offers. His jaw tightened. Those 3 men were not suitable. One had debts he had hidden from 2 previous families. One had a reputation in the north that society here had not yet heard about. The third was genuinely kind, but intended to take you to India indefinitely, and the document required your presence within England for your inheritance to be maintained. You investigated them, she said. Thoroughly, he said, and said nothing to me. I could not explain my reasons without revealing the document, he said, and revealing the document would have changed the terms of your situation here. The solicitor was very clear. You had to remain genuinely free of influence. Even the knowledge of the document was considered a form of influence. Emmeline pressed her hands together inside her shawl. She was thinking very hard and feeling very much at the same time, which was a combination she had never managed gracefully. Lord Darrow, she said. Phineas. Did you investigate him too? Something moved across Caspian's face. Yes. And? He is exactly what he appears to be, Caspian said quietly. Honest, solvent, genuinely fond of you, intending to remain in England. A pause. There is nothing wrong with him. She heard what he did not say, alongside what he did. Then why are you out here? She asked. He looked at her for a long moment. The cold moved between them. The frost on the garden path caught what little light spilled from the hall windows and turned it into something silver and thin. Because the document expired tonight, he said. She went very still. The terms were set to expire on the 10th anniversary of your arrival at Thornfield Hall, he said. My father believed 10 years was long enough for any genuine feeling to have formed or faded on its own, without interference. He stopped. Then, very quietly, tonight is the 10th anniversary. Emmeline looked at him and felt the ground shift beneath her feet in a way that had nothing to do with ice. "You waited," she said, and her voice came out very small. "You waited until tonight." "I could not speak before tonight," he said. "The moment I did, you would have lost everything your father worked his entire life to leave you." "You could have found a way," she said, and she heard the break in her own voice and could not stop it. 10 years, Caspian. You could have left me a note. You could have said something. Anything. Anything I said would have been a form of influence, he said. I was not willing to cost you your inheritance. Oh, not for my own relief. She turned away from him. She faced the dark hedges and breathed. The cold air filled her lungs, and she used it to hold herself together because she was very close to not holding together, and she refused to fall apart in this garden, in front of this man, after everything. "You should have told me," she said. "Legal document or not. You should have found a way to tell me." "Yes," he said simply. "I should have. I know that now. I told myself I was protecting you. But there were nights when I knew I was also protecting myself, because telling you the truth would have meant watching you choose, and I was afraid of what you would choose." She turned back to face him at that. She needed to see his face when she asked the next question. "What did you think I would choose?" He met her eyes. "I did not know. Or you had every reason to resent me. I gave you nothing to hold on to. I knew that. And I told myself that if you chose someone else freely, then that was what was right, and I would accept it." He stopped. "I am finding it considerably harder to accept than I expected." Emmeline looked at the man she had spent 10 years trying to stop caring about, and felt something complicated and enormous move through her chest. "Phineas is a good man," she said. "He is," Caspian agreed, and his voice did not waver, which somehow made it worse. "He has been kind to me," she said. "I know." "He makes me feel like I matter," she said, and she watched that land on Caspian like a quiet blow, watched him absorb it without flinching, which was its own kind of answer. "You have always mattered," he said. "I was simply not allowed to show you, and then I was afraid to, and neither of those things is your fault. Both of them are entirely mine." She looked at him for a long time. The cold was deep now, the kind that settled into the bones and stayed there, and neither of them moved. "I need to think," she finally said. He nodded once. "I know." "I am not forgiving you tonight," she said. "What you have just told me does not undo 10 years. I'm not asking for forgiveness tonight," he said. "I'm only asking that before you make a permanent decision, you have the truth. All of it. You deserved the truth long before now. I am sorry it took this long to give it to you." She looked at him one final moment, and then she walked back toward the hall doors without another word. He did not follow her this time, and she was grateful for that, and furious about it, and completely uncertain about everything she had been certain of an hour ago. She did not go back to the ballroom immediately. She stopped in the corridor just inside the garden doors, and stood with her back against the cold wall, and her eyes closed, and her hands pressed flat against the stone, and she gave herself exactly 60 seconds to feel everything she was feeling without doing anything about it. The 60 seconds were not enough. They were not remotely enough. She pushed off the wall and walked, not toward the ballroom, towards the East Library, which was unused during evening events, and would be dark and quiet and full of books she had read and reread in the long silent years of being invisible in this house. She needed somewhere to think that did not have candles and music and people watching her face. She found the library, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. It was not empty, and Miss Corabel Darrow was sitting in the large chair near the window, with a book open in her lap, her shoes off, her feet tucked beneath her, looking entirely unbothered by being caught reading alone in a dark library during a formal ball. She looked up at Emmeline and read her face in approximately 2 seconds. "Sit down," she said. Emmeline sat. Corabel set the book aside, reached over to the small side table, and poured 2 glasses from a decanter of something amber and pushed one into Emmeline's hand. Emmeline looked at it. "Drink it," Corabel said. "Your colour is alarming." Emmeline drank. It burned warmly down her throat and steadied something. "He told you something?" Corabel said. It was not a question. Emmeline looked at her sharply. "How did you know there was something to tell?" Corabel tilted her head. "Oh, I have been watching that man behave inexplicably toward you for 3 years, which is how long I have been attending events at Thornfield. 3 years of watching a duke who is, by all other accounts, exceptionally intelligent and perceptive, treat the woman he clearly cannot stop looking at as though she is furniture." She picked up her own glass. "Men of his kind do not do that without a reason. I simply did not know the reason." "I suspect I am about to learn it," Emmeline told her. "Not everything, not every word, but the shape of it. The document, her father, the 10 years, the expiration." Corabel listened without interrupting, which was not something she did naturally, and which meant she understood the weight of what she was hearing. When Emmeline finished, the library was quiet. "Well," Corabel said. "Yes," Emmeline said. "So that is—" Corabel paused, choosing with unusual care. "An enormous amount of information to receive on the same evening my brother gives you a ring." "Yes," Emmeline said again. Corabel looked at her carefully. "How do you feel?" "I do not know," Emmeline said honestly. "I feel angry. I feel sad. I feel something I do not have a name for yet, which is the worst kind of feeling because you cannot argue with it." "Do you believe him?" Corabel asked. Emmeline thought about his face in the garden. The tiredness, the unguarded quality she had never seen in him before, after 10 years of watching him guard everything. She thought about the way he had said yes when she accused him of investigating those men, without excuse or deflection, just yes. "Yes," she said. "I believe him." Corabel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, carefully, "No, Emmeline, I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that I am asking as someone who loves my brother completely, and also as someone who has found you rather exceptional over these past months." Emmeline looked at her. "When Phineas offered you that ring tonight," Corabel said, "and before the Duke appeared at your elbow, what were you feeling?" Emmeline opened her mouth, closed it. The honest answer was not a simple one. She had been feeling relief. She had been feeling warmth and gratitude, and the particular comfort of being chosen by someone who was safe. She had been feeling, underneath all of that, a quiet and persistent grief that she had assumed was simply the cost of moving forward. "I was glad," she said carefully, "and I was sad. And I thought the sadness was just about leaving this house." Corabel looked at her with an expression of deep and compassionate understanding. "I see," she said. It was not just about leaving the house, was it? Emmeline said. It was not a question. I suspect you already know the answer to that, Corabelle said gently. Emmeline pressed her fingers to her temple. She thought about 10 years of walking the garden paths alone. She thought about watching him at dinner after dinner, cataloguing his expressions, learning his habits, understanding his silences better than she understood most people's words. She thought about the way she had spent 4 years telling herself she was over it, and approximately 4 minutes proving that she was not. She thought about Phineas, who deserved someone whose heart was entirely present. But the thought settled over her like cold water, and she sat with it, because it was true, and it was important, and it was not going to go away simply because it was inconvenient. I cannot marry him, she said quietly. Corabelle did not look surprised. She did not look pleased either. She looked like a woman who had arrived at the same destination by a different road and was simply waiting at the gate. He will be hurt, Emmeline said. Yes, Corabelle said. He will be. But Phineas is not a man who would want someone who is not entirely his. He has more dignity than that and more sense. She paused. And I think when the shock passes, he will understand. He watches people very carefully. I do not think he was entirely unaware that something was unresolved. Emmeline stood. She set the glass down. Her hands were steadier now, which was something. I need to speak with him, she said. Tonight, before this goes any further. Corabelle nodded. He is in the east sitting room. He went looking for you 15 minutes ago, and I told him you needed air. Emmeline looked at her. You sent him to wait. I may have anticipated that you would need a moment before speaking with him, Corabelle said mildly, and picked her book back up, which was absolutely a performance of casualness, and they both knew it. Emmeline left the library and walked down the corridor toward the east sitting room. The hall sounds grew slightly louder, and then faded again as she moved away from the main rooms. She stopped outside the sitting room door. She could see the warm line of candlelight beneath it. She pressed her hands together as she thought about what she was going to say and could not find a clean version of it. So she decided to say the true version and hoped that was enough. She opened the door. Phineas was standing by the fireplace, his hands behind his back, his face turned toward the flames. He turned when she entered and read her immediately, the way he always read her, and she watched something in his expression shift and settle into something careful and braced. Emmeline, he said. Phineas, she said. I am so sorry. He looked at her for a long moment. She did not drop her eyes. She owed him that at the very least, the full weight of her honesty and her regret. It is him, he said quietly, not accusing, just naming the truth. It has been him for a long time, she said. I did not let myself see it, because I did not believe it was possible. So tonight I learned something that changed what I understood about these past 10 years. I cannot in good conscience accept your ring, knowing what I know now, and feeling what I feel. He nodded slowly. He looked at the fire for a moment, and she let him. Are you certain? He asked. Not about him. About ending this. Yes, she said, and I am deeply sorry. You have been nothing but kind and good, and you deserve someone whose heart has no old rooms in it. He exhaled. It was a long, careful exhale, the kind that takes something with it when it goes. He reached into his coat pocket, and she reached into hers, and they exchanged the ring without speaking, and that small transaction felt like the closing of something that could have been beautiful. I hope it goes well, he said finally, at whatever comes next. And his voice was steady and generous, and it made her feel even worse, the way only genuinely good people can make you feel worse. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." She left the ring in his hands and turned and walked out of the room, and the door closed behind her. The corridor was quiet. She stood in it for a moment and then began walking, not toward the ballroom, not toward the library, not toward any of the places where people and conversation and composed faces were required. Toward the garden. She did not know if he was still there. She did not know what she would say if he was. She did not know if 10 years could be unknotted in a single night, or if she was walking toward something that would only hurt in a new way. But she was done making decisions based on what was safest. She had been safe for 10 years. She had been protected and managed and kept at a careful distance from everything that might actually move her, and she had nothing to show for it but a decade of careful sadness. She pushed through the garden doors. The cold came back. The frost was heavier now, the path silvered and bright beneath the pale sky. He was still there. He was standing where she had left him, at the far end of the garden path, and he turned when he heard the doors open. He did not move toward her. He waited. He had always waited. She understood now, with a complicated and full-hearted kind of grief, that waiting was the only thing he had been able to do. She walked toward him. The frost crunched beneath her shoes. Her breath came in small, visible clouds. The music from inside the hall had slowed to something barely there, something that drifted out into the cold and dissolved before it reached them. She stopped in front of him. He looked at her, and then looked past her at the hall doors and then back at her face, and she watched him read the absence of the ring on her hand, and she watched what that did to him, the way it moved through his expression like light through a breaking cloud, cautious, and then carefully bright. "Emmeline," he said. Just her name again, but this time it sounded like a door opening. She looked up at him in the cold and the silver dark and said, "You have 10 minutes. You said 10 minutes. Start talking." And for the first time in 10 years, he smiled at her. Really smiled. Not the controlled social smile she had catalogued alongside his other expressions. Something real and slightly undone and entirely him. And she felt it land in the center of her chest, like something that had been in transit for a very long time and had finally arrived.
Emmeline, why do you haunt these grounds at night?
The night calls to me, Your Grace. I find solace here.
Solace or secrets, your presence here is no coincidence.
And yours?
He did not waste the 10 minutes. He told her everything that the garden had not had enough time for. He told her about the nights he had stood outside the library door, knowing she was inside reading, knowing she was 3 feet away, and making himself walk past. He told her about the morning she had come down to breakfast with paint on her fingers from the art room, and laughed at something the housekeeper said, and how he had stood at the top of the staircase, watching her laugh, and understood with complete and terrible clarity that he was in serious trouble. He told her about the document he had read 100 times, searching for a gap, a loophole, any small legal space he could use without costing her what was hers. He told her about the letters he had written and burned, 3 years of letters, never sent, never meant to be sent, just the only way he could find to say things that the law would not let him say to her face. She listened to all of it, standing in the frost with her shawl pulled tight and her eyes on his face, and her heart doing something entirely beyond her management. "The letters," she said when he paused. "What did they say?" He looked at her. "Things I will tell you properly. When it is not this cold, and you are not looking at me like you are still deciding whether to believe me." "I believe you," she said. "I told you that inside." "Believing the facts and believing the feeling are different things," he said quietly. "I know that. I am not asking you to feel anything tonight that you do not already feel. I am only asking for the chance to be honest with you going forward. Every day going forward. Art in every way I was not allowed to be before." She looked at him for a long moment. The cold was absolute around them, the garden held in frost and silence, and the thin, distant music from the hall. And she thought about 10 years and what they had cost both of them. And she thought about what it meant that he had borne it without breaking. And she thought about what it meant that she had too. "You kept me here," she said. "All 3 times someone offered to take me somewhere else." "Yes," he said. "Was that the document?" she asked. "Or was that you?" He held her gaze. "Both," he said. "The document required England. But the specific choice to keep you in this house, in this county, close enough that I could ensure you were safe and well, that was me. That was entirely me." Something shifted in her chest. She pressed her hands together inside her shawl. "There are things I need from you," she said. "If this goes anywhere from tonight, things I need to say clearly." "Say them," he said immediately. "I am not the same girl who arrived here at 19, she said. "I have opinions and I will say them. I have made a life inside myself during these 10 years, even when the outside life was restricted, and I will not have it flattened." "I know," he said. "You do not get to manage me," she said. "Not my choices, not my movements, not my companions." "I know," he said again. "And you will introduce me," she said, and her voice was quieter on this one but no less firm. "In every room. By name. Every time." Something crossed his face that looked very much like shame, clean and undefended, the kind that doesn't make excuses. "By name," he said. "In every room for the rest of my life, if you will allow it." She looked at him. He looked back. The frost settled around them, and the night was very still. She reached out and took his hand. Not romantically, not dramatically, just her fingers closing over his in the cold. A simple and direct thing, the kind of contact she had denied herself for 10 years and was done denying. His hand closed around hers and he went very still, like a man who had been handed something he had stopped believing he would ever hold, and was being extremely careful not to break it. They stood like that for a moment. "I am still angry," she said. "You should be," he said. "This is not forgiveness," she said. "This is the beginning of a conversation." "I know the difference," he said. "I will take the conversation." She looked up at him one more time and then turned back toward the hall. She did not release his hand. He fell into step beside her, and they walked back along the frost-bright path towards the doors, side by side, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Inside the hall, the music was still playing. Lady Orenthal Bassett saw them come in from the garden together, and her sharp grey eyes took in the entirety of the situation in one glance, and she raised her glass very slightly, in a gesture that was small and private, and completely eloquent. Lord Rufus Gale was still asleep in his armchair. Sir Alderton Finch had apparently resolved the horse argument, and was now deep in conversation with Corabel Darrow, who was talking with great energy and gesturing with her glass, and Finch was listening with the expression of someone who had stepped into a river that was moving faster than expected, but was finding it surprisingly agreeable. Caspian guided her through the edge of the room, with one hand resting lightly at her back, and he introduced her to 3 people before they had crossed half the floor. Full name. Clearly, without hesitation, she felt each introduction like something being restored to her, small and significant and long overdue. Corabel appeared at her elbow within minutes. She looked at Emmeline's face, and then at Caspian, and then back at Emmeline, and said nothing, which was the most restrained thing Corabel Darrow had ever done in her life, and Emmeline appreciated it deeply. "My brother?" Corabel asked very quietly. "He is well," Emmeline said. He was gracious. "He will be all right." Corabel nodded once. She reached out and pressed Emmeline's hand briefly. Then she turned back to Sir Alderton Finch and resumed her conversation at full velocity, as though nothing had interrupted it. The evening moved on. It grew later. Guests began to drift toward carriages and coats. Lord Harcastle's wife played one final piece on the piano, this time more accurately. Lord Rufus Gale woke up, looked around the room with complete composure, and accepted a cup of tea from a servant, as though he had been alert the entire time. Emmeline stood near the tall windows one last time, looking out at the garden where everything had changed. Caspian came to stand beside her, and this time he stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him along her arm. "The letters," she said quietly. "I want to read them." He looked at her. "They are not polished," he said. "They were not meant for anyone's eyes." "Good," she said. "I have had enough of polished." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I will have them sent to your rooms tomorrow." She nodded. Outside, the frost on the garden path caught the light from the windows and turned it bright and strange, and the dark hedges stood still in the cold air. She thought about all the mornings she had walked out there alone, and wondered what it would feel like to walk it with someone who chose to be beside her. She thought she might find out. 3 weeks after the night that changed everything, Emmeline received the letters. Not 1, not 3. 41 letters, bound with plain cord, delivered to her sitting room by Caspian's solicitor, with a brief note in Caspian's handwriting that said only, "These belong to you." She sat with them for a long time before she opened the first one. Then she read all 41 without stopping. They were not polished. He had been right about that. They were written in the dark hours. She could tell by the quality of the words, the way careful men write when they believe no one is watching. They were sometimes short and sometimes long, and occasionally barely coherent. And once, in the letter dated 4 years ago, he had crossed out an entire paragraph and written in the margin, "I cannot say this even to paper," which told her more than the crossed-out words ever could have. But through all 41 of them, one thing was consistent. He had seen her, every version of her. The one who painted badly and did not care. The one who argued with the groundskeeper about the rose beds, and the one who cried at the window, the winter her old companion left and did not know anyone had noticed. He had noticed everything. She sat in her chair by the window when she finished reading and looked out at the garden for a long time. Then she picked up her own pen. She did not write him a letter. She wrote him a list which felt more honest and more like herself, a list of 41 things she had wanted to say to him over the years and had not, things small and sharp, and a few of them very tender. She folded it, sealed it, and gave it to the housekeeper to deliver. Within an hour, she heard his footsteps in the corridor outside her sitting room. She knew his footsteps. 10 years had made sure of that. He knocked. "Come in," she said. He entered, holding the list in his hand. He had clearly read it in full, because he looked like a man who had been struck by several things in quick succession and had not yet finished recovering. He sat across from her without being invited, which she noted and approved of. She was done with a man who stood in doorways, waiting to be told he was allowed into rooms. "Number 12, he said. She thought back. Number 12 had been, "You always gave me the chair closest to the fire at dinner, even when there were guests who outranked me. And I knew it was deliberate, and it was the kindest thing anyone did for me for 3 years running." "Yes," she said. "I thought you had not noticed," he said. "I noticed everything," she said. "I just did not know what to do with any of it." He looked at her across the small space between their chairs and said, "Number 37. Number 37 had been considerably more personal, and she had written it at the end when she was no longer being careful, and it said, "There were mornings I woke up and my first thought was the exact shade of your eyes in winter light, and I hated myself for it every single time." She held his gaze and did not look away. "That one is self-explanatory," she said. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and looked at her with that completely open expression that she had only discovered he possessed 3 weeks ago and was still getting used to seeing. "Emmeline," he said, "I would like to court you. Properly. Openly. In full view of every person in this county." "You would like to court me," she repeated. "I am aware of the irony," he said. "You have lived in my house for 10 years, and I am asking to court you as though we have just met. But I want to do it correctly this time. I want you to have the thing you should have had from the beginning." She looked at him. "That is a very good answer," she said. "But I have a condition." "Name it," he said immediately. "We walk in the garden every morning," she said. "Together. Not as ward and guardian, not as anything official yet. Are just 2 people walking in the garden in the morning. I want to learn who you are when there is no document and no restriction and no performance for a room full of people." Something moved across his face that was warm and certain and very quietly joyful. "Every morning," he said. "Without exception." "Without exception," she agreed. The next morning was cold and clear, the frost still heavy on the garden paths, the sky pale and high above the dark hedges. Emmeline came down in her coat and gloves and found him already there, standing at the garden door, waiting. He had brought 2 cups of tea. He held one out to her without speaking. She took it. They walked. Lady Orinthal Bassett, who had arranged to extend her stay at Thornfield on a thin pretext involving a sprained ankle that no one entirely believed, watched them from the upstairs window and smiled into her own cup. Corabel Darrow, who had also stayed under similarly thin pretense, appeared beside her within minutes. They watched the 2 figures move along the frost-bright path below, close together, heads occasionally turned toward each other, talking in the unhurried way of people who have finally stopped being careful. "Well," Corabel said. "Indeed," said Orinthal. Below in the garden, Emmeline said something that made Caspian laugh, A real laugh, unguarded and warm, the kind that rang out across the cold morning air and startled a bird from the nearest hedge. She looked up at him with surprise, and then smiled, and it was the smile of someone seeing a side of a person they had wondered about for years and finding it better than imagined. He looked down at her with the steady, unhidden certainty of a man who had made his decision long ago and was only now, finally, free to show it. The days that followed built on each other quietly. Morning walks became longer. Conversations that started in the garden moved indoors and continued over meals, over books opened side by side in the library, over evenings where the fire burned low and neither of them moved to end it. He asked her opinions, and she gave them, fully and without softening, and he listened in a way that made listening feel like respect. He introduced her at every occasion, every room, every time, without prompting. She stopped dreaming about leaving. 6 weeks after the night of the ball, or he asked her to walk to the far end of the garden, where the old stone wall met the corner of the hedges, and the view opened out over the frozen fields beyond Thornfield. She had walked there 1,000 times alone. She walked there now with him beside her. He stopped at the wall. He turned to face her. He did not have a ring. She noticed that, and found that she was glad. A ring could come later, with all the proper ceremony the world required. What he had right now was simply his face and his voice, and 10 years of everything finally spoken. "I am not asking you to forget what the last 10 years were," he said. "I know they were hard. I know they were lonely. I know that what you built inside yourself during those years, you built entirely alone. And that is something I will spend a considerable amount of time making right." He looked at her steadily. "But I am asking you to let me be here now. Completely. Without document or restriction or distance. Just here." She looked at him. The frozen fields stretched out behind him. The cold morning light sat on everything cleanly. She thought about 19-year-old Emmeline, arriving at Thornfield in grief, looking at this house, and wondering if she would ever feel at home in it. She thought about every version of herself that had moved through these years, carrying something she could not name and could not put down. She thought about this morning, his laugh startling the bird from the hedge, and how it had felt like a door finally opening in a house she had long given up exploring. "You are already here," she said simply. He reached out and took her hand, the same way she had taken his in the garden 3 weeks ago, simple and direct, and held it. They stood at the wall looking out over the fields, and the morning stretched ahead of them, unhurried and open, with nothing between them anymore except the cold, clean air and the full, honest weight of everything they had finally stopped being afraid to say. Inside Thornfield Hall, Lord Rufus Gale arrived for an extended visit no one had quite invited him to. Sir Alderton Finch followed 2 days later, apparently at Cora Bell's suggestion, and Lady Orinthal Bassett showed no signs of leaving whatsoever. The house, which had been quiet for 10 years in the way that houses are quiet when the people inside them are keeping secrets, became gradually, room by room, a different kind of place. Louder, warmer, full of the particular noise that arrives when people stop pretending and start simply living. And every morning, without exception, 2 figures walked the frost-bright garden path together. That was how it began. Not with a grand declaration or a perfect moment, but with tea and cold air and the slow, brave work of two people learning each other without walls. And it was, in the end, more than enough.